This is a case that I find interesting. But I wasn't able to find any discussion of it on this sub. Although arguably not a classical serial killer because his crimes were not sexually or compulsively motivated, I think Jordan Monaghan is a rare example of a modern serial killer in an age when advances in policing and forensic science have nearly driven him extinct. I have based this write-up pretty heavily on the facts as given in a recent Court of Appeal judgment, fleshed out with information from the media, police and CPS. Unlike the canonical serial killers of the 70s and 80s, there is not a huge amount of biographical information available, so this will focus more on his crimes than on his background. Jordan Monaghan was born in July 1991, making him 21 at the time of his first known murder and 31 at time of writing. He lived in Blackburn, Lancashire in northern England during his crimes. He had 3 children with a woman named Laura Gray, who was born in November 1992. The two met when they were teenagers. Their first child, Logan, was born on 17 November 2011. When Monaghan was 20 and Gray was either 18 or had just turned 19. Monaghan was a persistent gambler and financially irresponsible, as a result of which bills went unpaid. In September 2012, Gray told Monaghan she wanted to leave him. That same day, Monaghan phoned her to tell her that Logan had swallowed some paracetamol tablets. He was taken to hospital and was fine. Although the episode apparently reconciled the two of them, this would begin a pattern thereafter. Whenever Gray resolved to leave Monaghan, one of their children would have a medical emergency of some sort, which would always convince her to stay with him. The couple's second child, Ruby, was born on 8 December 2012. Just under 3 weeks later, on 28 December, Monaghan was alone with her when he reported she was having difficulty breathing. She was taken to hospital, where she was diagnosed with bronchitis caused by a respiratory infection, and discharged 3 days later on 31 December. That night, just before 2 a.m. on New Year's Day, Gray was woken by Monaghan shouting that Ruby was not breathing. Again, an ambulance was called, but this time she could not be resuscitated and was pronounced dead at 2:45 a.m. She was 24 days old. A post-mortem examination was carried out, but there was no firm evidence of foul play, and so the bronchitis, diagnosed 3 days earlier, was eventually given as the cause of death. Just over 6 months later, in July 2013, Gray again tried to end their relationship. The next day, Monaghan phoned her and claimed that Logan had gone all floppy in his care. Again, doctors could find no obvious cause and diagnosed a respiratory infection. And again, the episode reconciled the couple. In August 2013, Gray found that Monaghan had a £2,000 credit card debt he had not told her about. He had spent the money mostly on gambling. She also saw him withdraw £300 cash from a secret bank account. She told him that she wanted to end their relationship. That afternoon, Monaghan took Logan out to a swimming pool so that Gray could sleep. CCTV showed him entering a changing cubicle, where they remained for 27 minutes, before leaving without doing any swimming. The rain cover of Logan's pushchair had been pulled across so that he could not be seen. When he returned home, Monaghan told Gray that Logan was sleeping. The two had dinner together before he left. When Gray, now alone, pulled back the rain cover of Logan's pushchair, she found that he was dead. Again, no obvious cause of death presented itself. A post-mortem examination suggested Logan may have been developing pneumonia, but this did not seem to explain his sudden death. Deliberate asphyxiation was a possibility, but there was no proof. Logan was 21 months old. As ever, his sudden death apparently reconciled the couple and Gray remained with Monaghan. The couple's third child was born in May 2016. Many of the sources I have seen say she cannot be named. Although she is named openly in the recent Court of Appeal judgment published on BAILII. As she is under 18 and I have not seen an order lifting the naming restrictions, I will refrain from naming her here. Possibly the name on BAILII is a pseudonym. At the girls' christening on 18 September, Gray saw Monaghan gambling on a fruit machine. This led to an argument, at the end of which she told him she would leave him. Just over a week later, on 27 September, Monaghan was alone with their daughter when he shouted to Gray that she was not breathing. An ambulance was called, although by the time it arrived she had recovered. No obvious cause for the apparent respiratory collapse could be found. On 2 October, she suffered another apparent respiratory collapse while alone with Monaghan. She recovered quickly, but spent 9 days in hospital while the cause was investigated. No cause could be identified. Monaghan and Gray separated in October 2016. Gray was given custody of their daughter. By this time, the improbable collection of the sudden deaths and respiratory collapses had been reported to police, who began an investigation. At interview, Monaghan denied smothering or otherwise assaulting his children. Had he stopped here, I think Monaghan would likely not have been prosecuted and almost certainly not convicted. There was no positive evidence he had assaulted any of his children. The case of Sally Clark had shown the risks of relying solely on statistics or coincidences in these circumstances. By May 2018, Monaghan was in a relationship with Evie Adams, who was 23 at the time of her death in October 2019. At some point he threatened Adams' ex-partner and their daughter, as a result of which he was given a 12-month restraining order to stay away from her and, presumably, her ex-partner and daughter. However, he was convicted of breaching it more than once and eventually sentenced to 12 weeks imprisonment. The order expired in May 2019. Adams eventually lost custody of her daughter. In October 2019, while still officially on police bail for the suspected murder of Ruby and Logan, Monaghan argued extensively with Adams. Monaghan was apparently by this point dealing in illegal prescription medication. On 17 October, Adams complained of feeling unwell. Monaghan began giving her tramadol, diazepam, both analgesics and pregabalin, an anticonvulsant. Adams did not know what drugs Monaghan was giving her, but trusted him. She felt increasingly unwell, which she attributed to a stomach flu. She tried several times to arrange for a medical appointment, but Monaghan took her phone and ignored calls from her GP and from NHS 111. On 24 October, he gave Adams a large overdose of tramadol and left her alone in the house. Taking her laptop and phone, he sent a text message from her phone to his suggesting that she was going to take her own life. At 8 p.m. her aunt found her dead in bed. She was 23. Naturally, the police were called, although again there was not strong direct evidence that she had been murdered. In November 2019, Monaghan produced a suicide note, apparently written by Adams, which he said he had found in the back of a picture frame. He was interviewed several times by Lancashire police, and eventually charged with the 3 murders over a year later. In January 2021, Monaghan was tried at Preston Crown Court. The Crown claimed that he had asphyxiated Ruby and Logan and deliberately poisoned Adams. He maintained that he had not assaulted any of his children and that Adams had taken her own life. After a 10-week trial, he was convicted of all charges in October 2021. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum tariff of 40 years before he will be eligible for parole. Monaghan had 11 previous convictions for 15 offences. The Solicitor General subsequently applied for the sentence to be reconsidered as unduly lenient. The Crown argued that no minimum tariff should be set, although conceding that his crimes did not fall within any of the circumstances outlined in. The Crown contended that the particular confluence of aggravating factors in his case mean a whole life order is appropriate. The Court of Appeal was not persuaded. Although agreed that the sentence handed down in the Crown Court was unduly lenient and increased it to life imprisonment with a minimum of 48 years before Monaghan will be eligible for parole. I believe this means he will be 77 years old before he can be released on license. Speaking personally, I find this case interesting as, based on his behavior, Monaghan seems to me to fit pretty solidly within Hare's conception of a psychopath. Psychopaths are often misunderstood as either crazy or thought of as Dexter Morgan-like evil geniuses. I think Monaghan is a good real-life example, cold and callous. No doubt narcissistic, but also irresponsible and a victim of his own antisocial behavior just as others were. This was my first ever write-up, so hopefully it made sense and flowed well. I tried to balance pedantic detail with readability. Let me know if you have any feedback, questions, whatever.